Welcome back. So today I want to discuss a concern of mine with the upcoming campaign merge. This isn't specifically about the merge. This is actually going to be about Japan as a nation in game. Now I really enjoy playing Japan. We're going to be playing a match in the Pacific during this. Not as Japan as America, since I'm trying to get a little bit further in them. But I'm going to cover some of my concerns with Japan. So, my biggest concern going forward is that right now, if you want to play in the Pacific, you pick America as the Pacific, or you pick Japan in the Pacific, and you go, full send. But I think one of the issues that we may run into with the merge is that there is not a very big player base who plays Japan. Or at least it doesn't seem like there's a significant player base that plays Japan. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think that Japan as a nation doesn't have the same cult following that a lot of other nations do. And I actually think that's probably where to start with. If you look at most World War II games, if you see Germany in the game, everybody expects to see a Panther or a Tiger. Everybody expects to see some form of a Sturmgewehr or an MP43. You know, these are things that have been around in World War II gaming for 20 years now. They're established, people look forward to them. You have wereaboos that always play Germany, that always look forward to using these same things every time that they play Germany. And you have the same thing for America, right? People get really excited to see the M1 Garand in every World War II game that they play. It's an iconic rifle. I'd love to have one in real life. People get excited for the BAR. There are different variants of the Sherman, like the Sherman Crocodile, or the Jumbo, that no matter what game you're in, people will sit down and they'll play America just to pull out their Thompson, just to pull out their M1 Garand, and it's just a pre-established following, right? The Soviets have it too. How many different World War II games have you seen drum mag PPSHs and T-34s and KV-1s and had people get extremely excited? You know, if the KV-2 ever comes to the game, people are going to absolutely lose their minds. But Japan doesn't really have that. Japan, to some extent, has it with some of their war machines. People love Yamato. But Yamato isn't really going to be a huge part of this game. We might see it in the background if we ever, I don't know, get to the Philippines, or if they wanted to be a little bit alt history with Okinawa, they could have it sinking in the distance, even though it sank pretty far away from Okinawa. But the moral of the story is you're never going to see it in the game. The most iconic thing that we're going to see in the game that people think about when they think Japan is the Zero. And we already have the Zero in the game. And this isn't exactly the greatest air sim out there, or air combat game. So I think that's number one. A lot of the excitement for playing different nations for people who are new to the game, they come from these pre-established mythical items. Well, maybe not mythical, but legendary items. Things that people feel they contributed hugely to a faction in the war. Things that you see in every video game and every movie. But most Japanese tech, it's not remembered like that. So the other issue, and this is an Enlisted specific issue, is there's a perception in the game of severe imbalance between the Americans and the Japanese, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that the Japanese have a lot of very good weapons. They might be a little bit further into their tech tree, though. I think that the Japanese SMGs, at least to me, are every bit as good as the American SMGs that are currently in the Pacific. I think that, well, I really like having the 50-round stick mags on the MP28 735. I don't have the SIG yet, but I imagine that the SIG is probably quite good. And the Type 100, the Type 100s, S100s, whatever they are, the not MP28s that the Japanese use. I kind of like those. But I will agree, their anti-tank weapons are, outside of the anti-tank rifle, are terrible. Now you give that anti-tank rifle a scope, and it's probably the single best anti-tank weapon and the best sniper in the game, bar nothing. I mean, it's a semi-automatic 20mm cannon, basically, that somehow your guy manages to shoulder and run around with. Don't ask me how, I sure couldn't do it. But that's awesome. Their tanks also are a little bit iffy. I mean, the Taisei is pretty terrible, even when you compare it to the M13, which is another open-topped AA platform, but your gunner sits a little bit lower, and having to, you know, I'm running into every mine in the world, aren't I? I need to start looking down. But the Japanese tanks, until you get to the Hawaii, they just don't have the same performance as American tanks, and going forward, that's going to get worse. I'm pretty sure they've said that rank 4 for America is going to play in the Pacific, and current Japanese tech is going to cap out at rank 4. Well, that still means that the Jumbo is going to make it here. Unless they decide to cap the Japanese at rank 3, but so far it doesn't look like they're going to do that. Now, for rifles, I think the Type Hiei and I think the Type Otsu are both perfectly adequate rifles. I wish that instead of giving Japan the Type 4, they had instead taken one of the two Battle Pass Type Hieis, the 10-round ones. I think they should have given one of those to Japan as a tech tree rifle, but it is what it is. Obviously, it's not going to happen now. But the Type 4 is every bit as good as the Garand, and I think the Garand and the Johnson are interchangeable, with one reloading faster and the other one having more ammo. So it's kind of a fair trade-off between the two. I think with LMGs, they're pretty much on par with each other. The starting stripper clip LMG for Japan, I think, is really misleadingly good. I don't like it too much because I think the block where you stick all the stripper clips blocks a lot of your vision. But that being said, I've used it a lot more lately because of the Japanese paratroopers, and it pretty consistently performs well. That being said, I like the Type 96, and I think getting the Type 99 is going to be huge. I think the Type 96 can perform basically the same role as the bar, and I think it can do it pretty well. And I don't think that the bar then stands out as being unique between the two. I think they have parity in SMGs, I think they have parity in LMGs. I think they have parity in rifles to some extent. I think the sights are the main issue on the Hiei and the Otsu, that and their ammo capacity, but once you get the Type 4, it's literally a Grand clone, so... I mean, they have parity there. I think in the air, the Zeros performed fine. In my experience, most planes in Enlisted at least, it really tends to come down to who sees the other guy first, and who gets the drop on them. But it's not the most air superiority game out there, or like the best air-to-air combat game out there. It's not War Thunder, basically. It takes some inspiration from it, but even the flight models don't quite feel the same. Anyway, all of this is to say that I don't think there's necessarily the imbalance that people think that there is between America and Japan, so much so as there's a perceived imbalance between America and Japan that's exacerbated by having less players playing Japan. If I compare the Pacific to Tunisia, for example, when one side's dominant in the Pacific, if I get on the other side and I bring one or two of my friends with me, we can pretty reliably win. Whereas in Tunisia, I feel like whichever side is the dominant side is extremely dominant. And so to that end, I think that the matches, at least with the weapons that are available in this campaign, are relatively balanced. So, going forward, my concern is that if there isn't a huge Japanese player base now, and matchmaking onto these beautiful Pacific maps is predicated by having a Japanese player base, then hit another mine. Then we're almost never going to see Pacific maps unless people start playing Japan. And people aren't just going to start playing Japan unless Darkflow gives them a good reason to. So I think Darkflow needs to start looking at solutions for how to incentivize people to play Japan, because this perceived technological gap that America has over Japan is only going to get more severe, because later in the war America does become technologically superior to Japan, even more so than it is right now. And part of that comes down to the resources that were available to Japan as a nation in real life, but also a lot of it comes down to Japanese tactics and senior decision-making. And I don't think that Japanese tactics are well reflected within the game. A huge part of Japanese doctrine, at least in the battles that we saw since they were largely on the defensive, was to have very well-prepared, heavily dug-in positions with zealously motivated forces behind them. But the problem that we run into in Enlisted is that most of these maps, well, to be fair, most of these maps are designed for Guadalcanal. And Guadalcanal's pretty early in the war, but also a lot of these maps don't have a whole lot of heavily prepared positions. So if we in the future start getting things like Iwo Jima or Okinawa, Tinian, Saipan, the Philippines, right? They can take a lot of these maps and they can put extensive tunnel networks in. They can start putting spider holes in for the Japanese to hide in. If they allowed the Japanese to be able to climb into trees and tie themselves off in them, it'd be harder to spot. Imagine if you were attacking into the Japanese and there was a tunnel network underneath the objective, and they were able to put their spawn beacons down in this tunnel network, and then you as the American player would have to go and be a tunnel rat and go and clear out these positions. It would be absolutely horrifying going in there, and they'd have every advantage. But those are the conditions that evolved throughout the war. And that's not reflected in game. So where the Japanese had an advantage in real life in pre-prepared positions and having heavily, highly motivated, zealous troops, that's not reflected in game. And to be fair, in a video game, everybody is fearless. Everybody is a zealot. That's not something that's easy to replicate in a game. Now, somebody I talked to recently suggested that I look at Rising Storm. And back in Rising Storm, when the Japanese would banzai charge, it would basically suppress you. If you've ever played other games that have a suppression mechanic, where your screen will shake, or it'll be harder to aim, those sorts of things, basically, game-created fear. You could do something like that and have it be a unique Japanese mechanic where when you charge with one of your soldiers, your entire squad charges and does a banzai charge. And that would at least add some national flavor to Japan and make people potentially more interested in playing them. But I think a much more practical solution is going forward, they need to start designing maps around the Japanese to allow them to have that national flavor. And on top of that, going forward, they need to start working on making their own cult for Japan in-game. And what do I mean by that? I mean exactly what I was talking about earlier with the wereabouts and the gewehr, or the freeaboos with the Garand. They need to take Japanese tech that, while other nations have similar things to it, they need to come out with it for Japan first to incentivize people to play it, to make it seem special. Because otherwise, I don't think we're going to be playing in the Pacific very much. So, for example, I think that instead of coming out with the ME262 for Germany, and I'm absolutely certain that sooner or later we will see an ME262 come out for Germany. I think we'll probably even see an Arado come out for Germany. But before they even think about putting an ME262 in for Germany, they should bring the Kika in for Japan. Because no matter what, if they put the ME262 in the game, or if they don't put the ME262 in the game, there will always be a sizable German player base, because Germany is the big bad of the war. They excite people to play them. It's something different than what they're always used to with America this or Russia that. There will always be people who play America purely because the Americans are one of the legendary powers of World War II that have some of the most incredible tech in the war. I can't believe I just let myself get killed by those guys. There will always be Soviet players who want to experience the KV-1, the legendary IS-2, people who want to run around the streets of Berlin with PPSH-41s with drum mags. These all have well-established followings. But if you start giving really, truly interesting equipment to Japan, even though other nations will have the same stuff before other nations do, you might at least encourage people to play Japan. And if they're partway through the tech tree, they might keep playing it. And I don't mean this to be, if they don't do this, then the Pacific is doomed. I don't think the Pacific is automatically doomed. I just think that it'll become very rare to see maps from the Pacific. And I think that would be a real shame. I think it's one of the more interesting campaigns. I think it's got really, truly beautiful maps. And I think there's a ton of potential for expanding it. I think that they can include so many different places from all of these different campaigns, and I think it would be awesome. But I'm not sure that we're going to see that much development in the Pacific if nobody's willing to play Japan. Since, unless something changes, we only get America versus Japan. I mean, maybe we'll get Russia versus Japan if they open up a Manchuria expansion. Maybe we'll get some more Australians, maybe some British versus Japan, but I mean, it's still only Japan as the enemy. It's not like Germany where there's a massive German player base of people that are excited to play Germany. And even if there wasn't a huge player base exclusively excited to play Germany, they can put in Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, they can put in Italy, they can put in Finland, and all of them can fight as the enemies to the American allies, the French allies, the UK allies, and against the Russians. So there's a lot more that they can do to populate the European theater and the North African theater than what they can do with the Pacific. People have to actually want to play Japan for there to be matches in the Pacific, because otherwise, since they're trying to cut down on bots in games, you're gonna pick low-tier America and you're gonna be fighting in Tunisia against the Italians and the Germans. And I like Tunisia a lot, but I also like the Pacific, so I don't know. I'm sure other people will have other really interesting ideas, and I would love to hear them. I'm kind of hoping that between all of you and between me and anybody else who wants to throw their voice in, that we can kind of get this across to Darkflow. I'm sure that they can see numbers that I can't see, but at least in my experience, unless my friends and I are playing Japan, there's usually not that many people on the Japanese team, even right now. And even when Pacific came out, I know initially when I was playing, Japan felt fairly dominant, but that tapered off really quickly. I mean, maybe we'll see another Japanese event squad, and maybe that'll bring in a resurgence of people playing Japan the way that Tunisia did with the Italian paratroopers. But all I can do is hope, because, again, I like this campaign. I want to keep being able to fight in the Pacific. So yeah, leave your comments down below. Give me any input. Go to the Darkflow forums and let them know that they need to do something to make people want to play Japan. And get out there and win your games.